Aisha, let me know if
Yes,
you're,
yes, we can see the screen.
so you can see the slides, right?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined, and very excited to have you all here. So quick question is everyone here already, or do we have like more people coming in and so on?
Almost majority of the students have joined in. We might have more students as well who will join in late.
Okay, great. All right. So everyone, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time out during your summer to be here with me. What I was thinking to do was, and I know that this is a session where I'm supposed to help you learn more about ideal skills that employers look for, the most sought after skills. I'm sure that that's a question that's top of mind for a lot of people. But I think what would be a really good use of this time would be, along with just perhaps some of the slides that I'm going to present to you, but what would be a really good use of the time would be if you can go ahead and use this time to ask your burning questions about various skills, various jobs, various roles. Because go ahead and feel free to drop in your questions if that's better, or just raise your hand in the middle and just ask anything that's in your mind in terms of how what kind of role what kind of skills are required for role A or so on. Just so make sure that you have that in mind as we're going through the session, and because I think that would be the most useful way to use this session. All right. So before we get into the slides, what would be a good idea is for you to learn more about my background. I thought it would be good to introduce myself and tell you more about all the different kinds of things that I've done, so that in case something clicks in your mind in terms of what you want to do as well, you can ask me more about that in your questions as well. All right. So I graduated in 2018. So it's been about 6 years now from LUMS. I did my management science degree. And at the time when I was doing management science, I wasn't too sure about where I wanted to be in life or what I wanted to do. But I think a couple of things that I always found really interesting was the startups and entrepreneurship. I was like, okay, this is very interesting. I definitely want to try a bit of this. And then later on in the final year, there was a lot of hype around consulting, which I'm sure a lot of you already know about. It's become even more hype now, but there was a lot of hype in the final year, so then got more interested in that. So to start off, I think in my final year, the first thing that I did was I tried setting up starting a business of my own. It was a traditional business. I had done two FMCG internships during my time at LUMS, one at Nestle, another at Pepsi. So I was very much interested in FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods, the retail space in general, and I wanted to do something in that. And I tried to run a business within that space during my final year at LUMS. But when as I was going through my final year, consulting came around, and I also got into Bain, and so I had to leave that behind so that I can go ahead and pursue a career in consulting because obviously, as everyone advised, it only made sense for me to pursue consulting at such an early stage of my career so that I can accelerate my learning, grow with peers, learn in an international market, and so on. So I went and I did that for a couple of years. At Bain, I was a pure generalist. So if you want to learn more about like how we define generalist versus specialist, I can talk more about that later on. But I was a pure generalist, which meant that I was doing general management consulting, and I did 8 different projects across 6 different industries. Uh, a very diverse experience. A bit too much, actually, I would say. But then once those 2 years ended, COVID came around, and then I decided that okay, you know what? Now that it's COVID, there's a huge scope for startups within Pakistan, and there was a lot of technology funding that was coming into Pakistan. And as I mentioned before, startups were always exciting to me. I do not know why they were in slums, but they were. And so I decided to come back and try something of my own. So in my third year of career, I tried working on an e-commerce business that went on for about a year. It did not work out for me, and I did not have the necessary skills, quote unquote, to be able to run that. And then we can talk about like why it failed as well, and would be more than happy to answer that question if that comes up. But I decided to stay within the technology space, and I thought to myself that I want to stay in startups, but I want to be able to do this with mentors and want to see a small company grow. So I joined this company called Rain. You may have heard of it. It's a technology services company based out of Islamabad, but now they have head offices across Lahore and Karachi as well. So I joined them after 3 years of working, and when I joined, I was employee number six. And 1 year after, the company had grown to like 150 people. So I was able to see the company's growth from 0 to 1, and that was very exciting. A lot of learning, had a lot of fun. So I did that up until now. Now I'm going on to pursue, so it's been about like another 3 years from that time. But now I'm going on to pursue, so from technology, again, I'm pivoting my career again. And so to pivot my career, I'm planning to pursue an MBA. So I'm headed in another few weeks to MIT Sloan School of Management, which is in Boston. It's a great school. There's a lot of like scope for technology and entrepreneurship, which is why I wanted to be there. And so I'm happy that I'm able to get that experience. But I will be pivoting my career in most likely investment management or something of the sort. Okay, so I'm happy to walk you through all the different steps later on, but I think enough about myself. What I'm going to do now is walk you through a presentation. So I do have a presentation for all of you about what ideal candidate skills look like across multiple careers. Okay, now before I dive into this, I do want to point out that these skills by no means they're not supposed to be specialist skills. And I do want there to be this discrepancy in your mind. You need to know the difference between like specialized skills and generalist skills. The specialized skills would be examples would be like knowing how to run a data science model, for example, knowing how to build an Excel model, knowing how to even do a PowerPoint presentation. That's a specialized skill, and then knowing, let's say, machine learning. So these are all specialist skills, and this list or the way I've broken it down does not cover the specialist skills. It covers generalist skills. And the generalist skills are usually cross-cutting, so it does not matter what career you're meant to go into. It doesn't matter if you, I mean, now that you're looking at the different kind of things that I've done, there's been consulting, technology consulting, business and sales, and project management. Like I've done all these different things. And I've applied the same set of generalist skills across the board, of course, with the help of mentors. And that's what I'm trying to propagate here as well. Okay. All right. So let's get into it. Right. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to run it a bit like this. It's fine. I'm not going to do slideshow. All right. So the three core skills, and some of you may even have heard of these before. There are a lot of buzzwords that are used around problem solving. Another one is client and communication and team player. Other buzzwords that you would hear in place of these skills would be, for example, problem solving can also be known as critical thinking, analytical abilities. It's usually that domain, right? The technical skill set. And then there's a second kind of skill set, which is uh, communication. When I say client and communication, the reason I put in the word client is not to say that all of you are going to be working in client services industries like consulting. I did once, but the second time I did not. Your client can also just be your peer, by the way. Your client can just be your manager. It can be your subordinate. It can be anybody. The client is supposed to be a person that you're supposed to communicate with, right? Or present something to. So that's why I put the word client in. I think it's important to make that clarification here. And then the third one that usually is very important is being a good team player. So this is another example of this would be having a good work ethic, being able to collaborate well, being able to solve conflicts well. You probably hear again these buzzwords a lot. You hear them, but then I'm going to try my best to make them more actionable for you all. and break them down into what really matters. Okay, so let's look at the first one, which is problem solving. Okay, I'm curious, like, what comes to your mind when you think problem solving? Because I know I've put in a few words, but what in like one or two words, what are some examples or ideas that come to your mind when you hear the word problem solving? So you can just put it in the chat. Actually, I'm gonna look at the chat right now.
Come on, everyone. Anyone who has an idea, please respond. You can raise your hand to give your feedback, or you can write it in the chat box.
Yeah, don't be shy. It can be wrong. It's okay to Yeah, I'm happy to hear wrong answers. Trust me. Okay, so Faisal raised his hand. Bravo. Brave. Good. Go ahead, Faisal. Okay, so I think yeah, Faisal, do you want to unmute or would you like to type in your answer in the chat box? Okay, you're not audible. Okay. Do you wanna do you wanna type it out then? Yeah, most likely. Yeah. Okay, so Gohar says coming up with a solution to any task at work, any task assigned to you, and then completing it. That is true. Yeah. Okay. And then Fasiuddin says thinking of creative solutions. Okay, interesting. All right. That's two different things that people are talking about, and both are correct. It's very good that you mentioned this, but this is like spot on. Uh, Finding, and then Faisal says finding a solution so that we do not face the given issue. Okay. So if you think about what you're all saying, right? You're basically saying in a nutshell that um, when we're given a task, no matter what it is, we have to be able to resolve it. We need to be able to find an answer to it. And that's true. Yeah, that is an analytical thinking. And it could, again, it applies in every field. Whether you're a machine learning scientist or a nuclear scientist or a management consultant, it doesn't matter what field you're in, you cannot. Yeah, and thank you, Nadeem, for pointing out positive attitude in approaching any problem. So in consulting, I remember when I was working at Bain, there was a word for it. It was called staying at cause. I was like, what does that mean, staying at cause? But what that meant was stay on track. Don't lose sight of what your track is. It's very easy for us to uh, start thinking about the problem and get meddled in that as opposed to finding the solution. So you're going to be like, oh my God, I have this problem. I think we have to do this. You have to do A and you have to do B. Um, but what you need to start thinking about is the problem exists. How do I execute? How do I get to the execution steps, right? And Zia mentions determining the problem and then finding an effective solution. That is absolutely spot on because that's part of the clarification of objectives thing that we usually do, right? Okay, great answers. Thank you, everyone. So step by step, I'm gonna give you three to four. I have like about 3 to 5 slides for this one. Obviously, it's a lot more extensive than just the things that I've mentioned here. But this is again to just give you an idea or sense of like what problem solving really looks like. And it's a very much a scientific process now that I think about it. It's like looking at the hypotheses and then, we're just going in and experimenting and trying different things in a most like time efficient manner possible to come to the solution. It's a little bit different in when you're doing it in business because you then need to find the most um, time effective solution as opposed to like the most um, efficient solution, right? Okay. Um, so let's look at the first thing. The first part of problem solving is usually being able to outline your objectives and processes. And the way you usually do that is you always, always, always clarify your goals, your objectives when you're assigned a task. Then you outline your process and you ask the 5 W's on top of that. And if it's a very complex task, then you clarify the methodology behind the process. So what does that mean? Is that a bunch of things? Let me tell you what that really means is, let's say you're asked, oh, hey, we want to round up. Your manager comes to you and they're like, look, we want to run a survey. We want to find out that how many people in Lahore use our product, for example. Okay, what's the first thing that you're going to do? A lot of people might say, oh, okay, let's just, maybe we could go, let me look up how to do this question. Maybe I can run a survey. But that's not the first step. You're not going to think about the how first. You're going to think about the objective first, your North Star. So the North Star means, why are we doing this, right? If you can understand the why, you can define the best process yourself. So you're going to go back to your manager, you're going to be like, okay, what is the objective of this? Why are we doing this? And I know some of you would be like, why? We're going to just go to our manager and start asking them why on earth they want to do this. Like why? Like, what if our manager gets offended? But that's not true. You're supposed to, they will appreciate, and people who understand these processes, they will always appreciate the fact that you want to understand why. So once they've told you, perhaps, let's again, I'm going to use an example. Let's say they say that, oh, we want to know because our sales are going down in Lahore, right? So we want to understand which product they like the most. So we just want to, that's why we want to do. Now you have your objective. You're like, so we're trying to improve sales in the city. That's why we're doing this. And so you can outline your process accordingly. Then you go ahead and you ask the remaining questions. You're like, okay, so now that I know what my objective is, okay, what do we want to do? Right, present a methodology. Do we want to run a survey? What is the total number of participants that we want to have, and so on. You would identify the methodology. Where do we want to do this? Well, that's already answered. They've mentioned that it's in Lahore. Okay, but in Lahore, do we want to do like the more centers of urban centers of Lahore? Do we want to go to commercial areas? Do we want to go to the residential areas? Where do we want to go? So you think a bit deeper on that. When do we want to do this? By when does this task need to be completed? And then who will really depend? Like, who is this really for? Like, who is the audience? Are we going to use this internally, or is this to present to the board? Who is this for? So that's how you really identify your objective and process. You need to be super clear in your head as to why you're doing this before you resolve any task. So that's skill set number one. And then the second one that I want to talk about is attention to detail. I haven't mentioned that word here, but it's amazing how many times attention to detail has gotten people into trouble at work. And it's also amazing and incredible at how much, I wouldn't say globally, but people in Pakistan, I've noticed, and this is important for you people coming from Pakistan, take this for granted. So do not take this for granted. Attention to detail is extremely important for you to think through, and start adopting a mindset today while you're studying at LUMS and before you start working, whether you're going on to do internships later on in the year or graduating soon, it doesn't matter. But start thinking about paying attention and making sure that you start adopt a mindset to work without flaws. And yes, that includes making sure that you check your work for typos. And yes, that doesn't mean that does include doing making sure it doesn't have silly mistakes, including spell check errors. Like, you right, it's always like, it always blows my mind that the simplest of things that we can control, to present information, we often don't look at it. We don't put the finishing touches on that. And trust me, this is very much a problem across the board, with various students coming in from Pakistan. Okay, so what does this really mean, right? Adopting a mindset. That does not mean that if you make a mistake, you're dead. That's not what this means. What it means is that uh, if you start to triangulate your information and start comparing it, sense checking it, and then double checking it. So, and sanity checking it. So there's multiple checks that I've talked about. Okay, so let's go over some examples of that. One example could be, you, let's say, have limited data, and you want to make sure that you put in the right information, right? You're doing some research project. You've been said that, hey, can you find us the size of the market for, again, product X? There's limited information available online. You ask ChatGPT or you ask Perplexity AI, you find the first answer, you put it on paper, and you present it. No, do not do that. Triangulate your data. So that's called creatively tackling the challenges of limited data. Triangulate it because the first answer that you might get might be from Wikipedia, and we all know how credible that source is, right? So always sense check, always think, always triangulate. Triangulate just means like it's like a triangle. It just means that okay, you have one piece of information. How do I compare it with a second piece of information, a second source, and third source? That's what it really means. Okay, and then you just compare and you make a best judgment about your number, for example. Another example of this is you sense check. So sense check really just means if I have like 300 million people in the United States, and the market size of a product that you, let's say, are getting is like 300 billion or something. You want to really go back. It's like, can it really be that large? Like, that's what sense checking means, right? And like, did I put an extra zero by in case maybe I want to, we don't know if this number makes sense because it should be maybe a smaller percentage of the overall size. So I'm going to go back to the drawing board and double check if this makes sense. So same goes for like things you've written. It can be stuff you've written down, or it could be numbers. It doesn't matter. But you need a sense check always, like once. Does this make sense? That's what it means. And the third way that I've often seen is like close your laptop, look away, come back, look at it again, and then scan your eyes like from left to right or up and down. It doesn't matter, but review. Always review. Did I make any mistake? So that's your final check. Okay, so some examples I've written over here is like, is the data input correct? Did I execute what I had planned? Do the numbers make sense? Am I using the right data? Does this analysis fit into the overall story? This also really matters. Oftentimes we'll just be deep into the analysis and we'll be like, yeah, I built a model or I did this research, but I forgot to write a conclusion which relates to sales, which was the point of this whole situation thing, right? So that's what this means. Very important that you start developing attention to detail today. Very critical skill, important in any field. Trust me. And then I want to mention like why. Why is this important? Because demonstrating this will build trust and open up bigger opportunities for you. Most employers are looking for candidates whom they can trust, right? Whom they can rely on. So that's why this is important. All right. Let's look at the next one. So structure, I think you get to hear this a lot, most likely in your classes and otherwise as well. Try and start finding ways to develop the skill to think in frameworks. And again, this will matter anywhere you go and anything you do, any interview you give. So one example of thinking in structure or thinking with frameworks is starting to make lists in your head when you're communicating so that when you're talking to someone, you're not just rambling on and on. You're giving them a list of things that you have in mind. You try and use odd numbers. So, for example, if you're telling people like reasons why, let's say your analysis is not working, it's just a simple conversation. You want to be able to tell them, I have 3 reasons or I have 5 reasons why it didn't work. Or if you want to use even numbers, but odd numbers tend to work better. All right. That's the main one that I wanted to talk here. I think Misi, I did not want to go over so much because, yeah, but because I think that would be going too deep into this. You can look this up yourself. It's a way of thinking or an approach which allows you to categorize in a way that does not overlap but covers all different possibilities. And then the last one is, again, something I do not want to go over in this session. It just was there for you to have. So that's the second scale. Third scale, sorry, of problem solving. Okay, now the next one is very interesting. It's so at Bain, they used to call it 80-20, but they have different terminology for it across different fields. What 80-20 or being efficient really means is that you focus your effort where it's most impactful so that you drive your answers efficiently. And this is very important in business. It may not be so much in academic endeavors. So I just, again, one clarification for that. And the reason why you want to focus your efforts where it's most impactful is because you will often have deadlines you need quick turnaround, so you want to emphasize the things that matter the most. You often have broad scopes. Let's say you're working on a proposal and you've been given a very broad scope, so you need to then again focus your effort. Sometimes markets just perform a certain way, so it's a challenge that without relevant experience you cannot give too many broad answers. So let's again go over some examples for that. One example could be that you're working on a project and they ask you that, hey, we're trying to reduce costs. And this is actually a real life example. I once worked on a cost transformation project at Bain, and the client was asking, okay, here's our entire business. We have X billion dollars that we want to save. I'm just giving you examples. And can you do that in 2 years? Well, not enough time, right? That's a lot of money that they want to save and a lot of costs they want to cut. So what do? You start by seeing what are the most cost intensive projects that they're working on, and can we derive value from there? Is there a way that we can cut cost there in the businesses that are the most expensive? See, so think about it that way. And this can again apply in most places. Let's say you're evaluating the portfolio of a company, and the company is like, some of our portfolio is seems a bit iffy because we don't know which one to let go. We have four different businesses. Again, this is a real life example. It was a Saudi conglomerate. They had four different business models, four different businesses, family business. Some of them were making them money, profits, and others were not. They were like, which one should we let go of? So we started by looking at the businesses that were generating the most revenue. We started there, and then we went to the smaller ones. So some examples. In order to do 80/20, what I just mentioned, you always have to answer the right questions, which are four that I've outlined for you. One is, what questions are critical to the client? Um, where is the highest potential for impact? Which analyses can transform an insight? What are the worst possible assumptions that we do not want to consider? Okay, all right. Let's move on to the last one, which is also good to know when you're doing problem solving work, which is related to roadblocks. So roadblocks will come up all the time. And so the way you work around them is you try and, number one, you try and find an alternative solution. Let's say if source A is not working, I can go to source B, source C. I can try and maybe if Google is not giving me the answer, maybe I can go ahead and ask my peer. Just another example. The second thing you want to do when you hit a roadblock is communicate. And communicating early really helps you. So what this means is you if you have a roadblock, you want to be able and tell your peer or your supervisor or the people around you specifically where your roadblock is and what you're trying to deal with, because you never know who can help you in that moment to resolve that problem as soon as possible. And then the third skill is you need to be able to triangulate to avoid roadblocks. So use, again, I've mentioned this before, but then this shows up here as well. Not very messy of me, but use multiple data resources to estimate an answer, and then you reality check it. Okay. All right, so that's all on problem solving. Any questions? Let me actually open the screen and see if there's any questions around this.
We have a question from Faisal. Yes, Faisal, please go ahead.
Yeah,
Faisal, we cannot hear you. Can you
yeah,
type it in the chat box?
yeah. I think that would be a great idea. Okay, so while Faisal is writing out his thing, anyone else have any questions on this? Uh, this is also a good time for you to pause and then ask your questions unrelated to problem solving as well. It's fine because I do understand that you might have a question about something else I said before. Feel free to write it out and then I'll just continue. What are the worst possible assumptions? So Faisal, what this really means is, and I'm gonna try and think of an example for this one. What it basically just simply means is whenever you are whenever you are trying to find an answer, right? Like you're trying to you're let's say you're doing a research, your piece of research on something, you are going to try and you are going to make some assumptions about this piece of information. You're going to make some informations about you're going to make let's say, for example, let's go back to the cost transformation project. One assumption I might make is, what if all of these business models are very hard to tackle and we can't cut down costs. What if we can't cut down costs from any one of them, right? What do I want to do? What do I want to do in that situation? So it's kind of just preparing for the worst possible outcome. I think someone else is speaking as well.
Yes, we have a question from Zuhaib as well.
Yeah, Zohib, go ahead.
Hi, Ikra, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, so I have a question that is not very much relevant to the thing that we just discussed, but I have a question that is related to the general communication with the client. So, for instance, if somehow one of your team member or even you made a mistake with the client, like regarding a payment or something else, like that is not very big or it's negligible. So is it a good way to apologize to your client and just pose it as a mistake, or just say that no, you were negligent on your part because you didn't communicate firstly about the this problem, so that we were not aware of this. So is it better to take it as a mistake, or is it better to not take it as a mistake?
It would really depend. And by a client, you mean external client, right?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So with external clients, it is a bit tricky. You want to be able to let them know. Absolutely. It's always important to let them know that, hey, there is a mistake. I think what really helps and what is really professional is that you're also then able to follow up with, this is how I'm going to fix this problem, and then get back to you. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. And if you fixed it, it still does it make sense? Like before fixing it, does it make sense to apologize and then just propose a solution to them?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Uh, it's and again, like correct me if I'm not getting your question wrong. It's always better to give your sending your apologies for whatever has gone wrong as early as possible, as opposed to later on. There is an ethical dilemma of the fact that, we can't just give someone wrong information, especially when we knew that there's something wrong with it, right? But then there's also the second thing where they might find out much later on, and then at the point when they do, it will definitely damage your relationship with the client long term, right? So if you find out early on and you're like, hey, I just want to point out that there is a little bit of a mistake, let me get back to you. They're just people as well at the end of the day, right? We don't need to be scared of people. You'll be like, hey, there is a bit of a mistake. I'd like to work on it and fix it before I resend it to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. It completely makes sense. Thank you for your answer.
Okay, great. So Ahmed has a question. Could you elaborate more on managing expectations, such as the instance you mentioned where a client put forward an unfeasible request with regards to, say, timeline? Would appreciate if it's discussed with regards to a client as well as an employer. Oh yeah, managing expectations, 100% a huge problem that comes up every now and then. So I'm glad you brought this question up, Emma, because it's something that all of us have to deal with, right? It's such a huge problem where everyone thinks that, hey, this is the job that we want you to do, and then full stop, right? And then nothing else. When we get, let's say, unfeasible requests, right? Requests that are either in terms of timeline or in terms of scope. Sometimes the scope is too large. You're like, I cannot possibly finish this in 3 months. Or it's the fact that, okay, can you just send me this presentation tomorrow? You're like, I can't possibly finish this by tomorrow. You have but managing expectation is basically you just going back and letting them know that that's not possible, by not saying no, but by saying that I'm going to try and finish this, but realistically, I need X amount of time. So you're supposed to communicate another time, right? You're not supposed to just let them know that, hey, I can't do it. You're supposed to then do your own estimation of what that time would look like and then let them know. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So I have no further questions. I'll just move on. Yeah. Okay. So then the rest of it is actually the smaller chunks of what your ideal candidate skills really look like. So the second section that we're gonna go over is client and communication, and I know that some questions on communication are coming up. So let's go over this. First thing that's important is whenever you're about to present something or you're communicating something, always internalize the objective of that. And the way you do this is by doing four things. Number one, you always tailor your presentation or your piece of information to the audience that you're going to present it to. What kind of a person am I speaking to? Are they executives? Are they experts? Are they attentive? Are they going to be indifferent to what I'm about to say? And this, by the way, really matters when you're going for job interviews as well, because you have to keep in mind that I'm sitting next to a person you know, who may or may not be interested in what I'm about to say, right? So you have to tailor your information accordingly. The second one is assess motivation of the audience. What are they trying to get out of this presentation? Then the third thing that matters is knowledge. How much knowledge does the audience have on the topic or the tools that are to be discussed? And then the final one is what could be the potential question. And this is a task that you're meant to complete on your own, which is what is a pool of potential questions that may be asked, and how do I prepare for that accordingly? So let's actually talk a little bit more about the first thing, which is audience. What I've come to realize is that there's audiences across different stakeholders vary so much in terms of how they want to receive information. So an example is the CEO of a company versus, let's say, an academic, right? An academic researcher. An academic researcher wants to get to the conclusion at the end. The CEO of a company wants the conclusion first because they're impatient, and then they want you to run them through the rest of the, let's say, analysis of what you were doing, right? So let's say there you have a recommendation or a conclusion, and then you have analysis. The CEO wants first conclusion, then analysis. The academic researcher will want analysis first and then conclusion. So you need to think more about, again, in consulting, it used to be called answer first versus answer last. But however you want to look at it, tailoring your presentation to what kind of audience you have, how impatient they are, or how patient they are, how much they care about what matters a lot. So another example, I know someone over here was saying pitching an idea, right? I think you were talking about a pitch deck. So if we're looking at a pitch deck, if the investor has a financial services background, for sure they want to dive into the numbers. So you want to put those there. If they don't have that, they have a marketing background. They want to know how you're going to sell and who is going to be your market. So you have to think through the objective of the presentation and the audience, especially. And again, how much knowledge does the audience have? All right. This is just a funny thing I remember that used to be told to us, and I thought it would be good for you to know. You always build a narrative when you're communicating that passes the busy grandmother test, which is that it needs to be very simple and easy to digest. Don't put in too many buzzwords, difficult pieces of information. You don't need that. You need to simplify the message that you're about to get across. So very important for you to know. So structure, but also simple. Okay. And then I want to talk a little bit about meetings. So how do you get ready going into meetings? Now these meetings could be external client meetings, sure, but this is also relevant when you're doing your day-to-day meetings with your own teams or with your managers, your supervisors, your subordinates. It doesn't matter who it is, but being ready going into a meeting matters a lot. And the way you usually do this is you always review what materials are needed for the meeting. You review the purpose. You're always on time. You should know what your role is going into that meeting. How many questions, if at all, should I be asking in this meeting? These are all things you need to think through before you go in, and that's what effective communication essentially really is, right, at work. Okay, so that's all on client and communication. And I think what I'm gonna do is now like just wrap this section up as well because it's also pretty short, and then we'll just go into questions and we'll just do that till the end of the session. Okay, so let's talk about teamwork. Um, Teamwork, you probably get to do a lot of yourself because you're studying right now at LUMS. I'm assuming all of you are studying and you have a lot of different projects and you have to work with all kinds of issues. You sometimes have conflicts, sometimes you don't. Working in teams is and having the skill to work in teams is so important because um, people are relying on you. So you have this huge responsibility. You're like this one puzzle piece in like a much bigger game, and so you need to remember to understand your role and work in teams. Not just like from an ethical perspective because people rely on you, but also because you need to get the job done. You're that one puzzle piece, right? So two things usually are important that I thought would be good to bring up in this section, and obviously there's many, many more, but I thought that one thing we should really definitely talk about is time management, planning your day, planning your week, knowing how to prioritize your day. And first I want to talk about like why this is important. Um, Many times your whatever you're going to complete is have is going to depend on so let's say manager is completing like a piece of work, right? Like they want a piece of work to be completed. The marketing person is supposed to give one input, the salesperson is going to give one input, you're going to give one input, and then you're going to take that forward, right? That piece of whatever the complete deliverable looks like. If you're delayed in any way, you're basically essentially delaying the output. So that's why prioritization is important. So there's that, but then there's also the fact that what kind of goals do we want to work on together as a team? So prioritizing not just the time or the number of goals that we want to complete together as a team, but then prioritizing what kind of goals as well matters. So I'll give you again another example of this. I remember that let's say I was asked to complete a piece of analysis by a manager who was like, "Hey, can you go ahead and just finish these slides A, B, and C?" The consultant, however, wanted me to do something else. Now I need to prioritize between what the manager has said to me versus what the consultant has said to me, right? Because both are urgent tasks, but I need to figure out which one needs to go in first. So it turns out that what the consultant wants me to do, like that task looks like, is what I need to prioritize it first because it needs to be sent in today. And the second thing can be done by tomorrow, so I can do that after. And that's really just how you prioritize your tasks and plan your tasks throughout the day. And this is an example of this medical triage, which we often used to discuss when we were at Rain, which was it really helps for you to mentally take a note of where do the list of tasks that you have to do, where do they really sit? Are they an emergency? You obviously want to get the emergency ones done first. Then you want to move on to the urgent ones, right? And then in the same day, once you've done the emergency and some of the urgent ones, you want to maybe get rid of a little bit of the non-urgent ones as well. And the dead ones, maybe you could skip till the very end. Okay. So that's a bit on prioritization of time within teams. Then the last thing I want to talk about is biases and bias busting in teams. And there's a bunch of scenarios that I listed out that I thought would be interesting to talk about. I think as students of LUMS and people who work in Pakistan, it's good for you to learn to be the advocates for uh, operating in really good inclusion based teams, and so you can take a lot of those actions, and I thought that maybe that's a good thing that we can discuss. um, so whenever you're working in teams, always try and self-reflect on what are the different things that are making this team not very inclusive. You need to evaluate your language, for example. Try and always reduce your bias. Be humble, be curious about what it is that is required of you, and I think that those general skills really help you become this kind of a person that is appreciated in a team. And then one image that I wanted to show you, which was very interesting, and I think this was something that one of our managers used to show to us as well. It was like, look, there's a way that you can perceive something, and you might think you are correct, but then there's multiple other ways to look at the same reality, right? So this is true, and so is this. And this is a good way for you to understand why being an inclusive member of your team is super important. So there's a bunch of scenarios that I thought we ran when we were doing this, but I think I'm going to skip those and go to the end. And that's all from my side in terms of presentation. Now, more than happy to take on any questions, so feel free to throw them in. This is the end of the presentation, so you can ask me any questions about the presentation or otherwise anything about my background, why I did what I did, why something failed or did not work, and then you can also ask about, hey, I'm looking to get into role A. How do I need to prepare? What are the specific skills that I need to build from today to get into that? So you can send me any questions around those three topics. I do want to put in one disclaimer here. All of the skills that I've mentioned, all of the quote unquote ideal candidate skills that I've mentioned, these are skills that most employers are looking for when they come to interview you or come to speak to you or come to hire you for your company, right? So they're doing that. They're trying to find evidence of some or some of or most of these kinds of skills when they're coming to speak to you. So an example could be they're trying to see how does this person communicate? Do they have a structured way of talking or do they ramble on and on? That's one example. Okay, how do we judge their attention to details? A lot of the times when you do like case projects or you do take home exercises, they're trying to analyze like how detail oriented can you be. So that's just two examples of that. And then when they ask you questions like "Tell me about yourself," they try and see like what do you prioritize when you're answering that question. All right, so that's all from my side. So I'm gonna pause here, and happy to take on more questions. Okay, so Ahmed, you have a question. Go ahead.
Uh, Hi, am I audible?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this isn't exactly related to once you're in a role, but more so I just want to ask about any interview skills you could share, or any tips or tricks or anything of the like.
Um, okay, so do you want some just broad skills? Okay. One thing you want to do when you go into interview is number one, um, always prepare answers beforehand. So this is something that we've always done whenever we've done interviews. I remember that like a lot, me and my friends, like we used to go crazy preparing for answers for interviews. But when you're preparing answers, you don't just want to prepare for anything. You want your answers to be research based. There's a set of like 10 to 15 questions that most employers always ask. You can Google them, and then you always want to make sure that you have answers ready for them. That's my tip number one. The tip number two will be try and keep your answers very concise and do not ramble. Do not go on and on and on into all the stories of the world. You want to prioritize which stories you want to give out, and then kind of restrain yourself from giving out more information. At the same time, you also don't want to give out too little information that yeah, I worked on A, the end. No, that's also not right. You want to give the right amount of information. And so number three, the way to do that is to always kind of try and use the sort of a star approach, which a lot of people talk about. I mean, I've never really used star perfectly, but it is a good, I would say, north star to think about. But essentially what it requires you to do is give an example of a situation, some action that you took, and then what was the outcome or the learning from that, right? So broadly, that's the thing you want to do. And I think the fourth thing that's really important that I would mention again is being able to answer the question of why you want to join that company or that industry is very important. Everyone's going to ask that. They're like, why do you want to join us? Why do you want to join this company or come to work in this region? And I think any company will ask you that. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a Unilever or Bain or McKinsey or whoever. They all want to know why you want to join the company. So have a very good answer that is based on research for for that company. Look up stories of why that company is a really good fit for you. What have you done to kind of prove to them that, hey, I've done these things before, like I've done these projects because I'm really interested in consulting, for example. So that why that company question becomes really important. And then there's another thing that I want to, yeah, always have questions for the person that you're going to speak to in interviews. Super important. They want to see how smart you are. They want to see how attentive you are, how much you've thought about them. So you want to be able to ask them. So what is your role? What does your day-to-day role look like? If you want to go one step further, you could research the person. If you happen to find out about who's going to be your interviewer, you can research that person on LinkedIn and ask them a very specific question about their background. I think leaves a really good impression during interviews as well.
Right. Thank you so much. Just a little follow up. I'm not sure if it's relevant. I just want to ask if you have any tips or any relevant skills you think would be good for the financial services industry, maybe.
Oh, financial services industry. Well, that would really depend. If you're talking about Pakistan, it's a whole other space. But if you're talking about global, it's something completely different. I can send you some resources if you want. Why don't you drop me a note on LinkedIn, and ask me this question there? I can send you some resources, because if you're talking about like finance specifically, there's some stuff on Wall Street Prep that you can look at. Then because apart from all the behavioral things that I just mentioned right now, if you want to specifically talk about financial services, I can send you some resources that I came across that might be useful to you. But I think the two things that really help in financial services is that having financial acumen. So again, going over, let's say, Wall Street Prep or whatever other, or accounting courses or things like that, they really want to be able to see that or evidence of that, something you've done before. And then the second thing I think that really helps is having general knowledge about the industry. So let's say you're reading the Wall Street Journal, or you're reading Bloomberg regularly, or you watch the stock market. It doesn't matter what it is, but those two things I think are really helpful for financial services. But if you want to dig deeper, feel free to drop me a message separately about that as well. Okay,
Right. I'll hit you up. Thank you so much.
no problem. So we have Fasi. You have some questions?
Yeah. So I have two questions. The first question is a bit more relevant to me since I'm an engineering student, and I feel that in general, engineering students have lesser awareness about the realm of consultancy as compared to business majors. So my question is this: um, to what extent should a consultant have knowledge about finance and businesses and the way they run in order to be an effective consultant? Because some, as you mentioned, are general skills like problem solving, teamwork, but kind of those specialized knowledge, to what extent are you supposed to have to be an effective or attractive candidate?
So when you're interviewing, like during the interview process, or do you mean after getting the job?
I mean, in general, are engineering students at a disadvantage when they're applying for a consultancy job? I feel that should be the case.
I see. It's interesting you bring this question, because when I went to work at Bain and I actually did consulting, I realized that engineering students actually have a great advantage in a company like that. And I'll tell you why. Some of my really good friends at Bain, and then people that I started to meet around the world, were coming from engineering backgrounds and going into consulting. So it was really interesting. So the American University of Beirut, I remember, recruited a lot of mechanical engineers going into consulting, and so did American University of Cairo, AUC. They did the same thing. They were hiring a lot of like engineers for consulting roles. And then around the world as well, I started to see a lot of engineers with like different backgrounds going into consulting roles. And at first I was like, wait, this is interesting. So it turns out, as long as you can do a good job at the interview, which I will just come to, your engineering skills are very useful in consulting, because the kind of math skills and like the kind of decision making skills that you learn in consulting, the design skills and the process oriented skills that you learn in engineering are very useful to apply in consulting, especially your quant skills. You already have really good quant skill set. So I think in general, if you talk about your whether you're at a disadvantage, no, I think you're very much at advantage going into those roles. In Pakistan, I do agree that when you're becoming an engineer, I don't think you've developed enough awareness of how to clear those interviews, and you probably haven't prepared for that. That is something though that you can work on and prepare for. Um, so the only disadvantage or sort of thing that I would say that really would require a bit of extra work from an engineer would be to sort of brush up on their general business skills. Like the only advantage that business schools students would have when they're doing case interviews is the fact that yeah, they probably already know that how profit works and that revenue, what is a breakdown of revenue. Yeah, sure, those like few simple equations that they already know of. But it's nothing that you can't learn by practicing case interviews. Even if you don't have a background in business, it'll just require you a little bit extra work, but that's about it. I don't see any disadvantages. Yeah.
All right, thank you. And my second question was more relevant to you, is that I saw you're an MBA candidate at MIT, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, what prompted, doing an MBA at this point? Like, why didn't you try it when you just left university, when you graduated? Kind of like, what's prompted you now? Because I'm a senior, and it's kind of the time you make decisions on whether you want to opt for the industry or grad school. So I was thinking, what was your, thinking process at that time and right now?
Yeah, sure. Also, great question. Many people ask this question all the time. Let me actually also just stop sharing my screen now. So to be honest, Fasi, I no one who's in the professional world actually recommends you going for a grad degree right after you've left university, unless you are very certain about what specialized degree you want to pursue. Unless you're very certain about that, and you're like, I want to stay in this degree. I know that I want to become, let's say, again, machine learning scientist. I don't know why that comes to my mind. Let's say I know that I want to become a machine learning scientist. That's all I want to do. I'm already in computer science. I want to pursue that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get the specialization, and I'm going to then continue, move on with my life, right? That is the only time it makes sense for you to do a grad degree after you're finishing up your bachelor programs, right? Otherwise, it does not, because I can guarantee you do not know what are the things you're going to learn to love or hate unless you actually spend 4 to 6 years in industry, right? So that's the first thing I want to mention. Second thing is, I mean, I never planned on doing grad as much. I mean, that may have come to my mind, and I did apply for a few schools randomly, but it wasn't a thing that was top of mind anyway when I was doing bachelor's. The average work experience for a degree like MBA is 5 years. So I'm doing it at right about the same time that most of my cohort will be doing it. Um, because and then most MBA programs are also not going to take you unless you at least have 2 years. It's just because if you can go ahead and look at most MBA programs and the average work experiences for their programs, and that'll give you a sense of like what kind of a cohort is coming into those programs. And the reason for that is they feel at least the people who are taking you, or they feel that the school feels that you won't be able to bring in the richness of experience if you're just coming out of bachelor's, right? So that's the second thing. And then third thing, if you want to ask me like what was my personal reason as to why I'm doing my MBA now, well, it's because I'm a career switcher. So you can either broaden your career, or you can expand your career, and keep moving forward with whatever you're doing, and you can use MBA as a pause to experiment with different things, or you switch your career. So a lot of MBA students are career switchers, so I'm going to be one of them as well, and that's why I'm going to be doing an MBA. That makes sense. Okay.
Yes, thank you. It was really insightful.
Okay, I'm glad it helped. So we have Faisal and Zainab. I don't know who raised their hand first. I will let you all ethically decide who was the first one and go ahead and.
Faisal raised his hand
Oh,
first, and then it was Zainab, so we can go with Faisal first.
great,
Am I
Faisal.
audible now? I think I am audible now, right?
You
Yes,
are.
Faisal, we can hear you now.
Perfect. Thank you, Ikra. It was a really insightful session. I just want to ask that, when we talk about consulting and particularly MBB, what really stand outs when we talk about a candidate? For example, like uh, हम जो हम सारे लाइक बैच में हैं, सबके पास
Mm-hmm.
आईटी एक्सपीरियंस है, सबके पास
Mm,
इंटर्नशिप्स के एक्सपीरियंस है, 2-3 इंटर्नशिप सबने की होती हैं, सब लीडरशिप रोल में होते हैं। सब ने पार्ट टाइम काम किया होता है, मेजॉरिटी ने सबने कोई कम्युनिटी सर्विस प्रोजेक्ट किया होता है। So what
mm-hmm.
really stand out? Here is the resume of a candidate, and here is the cover letter, and here is the assessment. So let us shortlist this candidate for the interview. Like, what is that thing like? So
Yeah.
I always remain confused about this thing.
Yeah, and so Faisal, for context, can you tell me like what year are you in right now? Or what's your program?
So I am in my final year in Bachelor's in Accounting and Finance.
Got it. All right. So there's four filters that they usually use in consulting, and this will like change a bit by bit, by based on what company we're talking about. But there are essentially four filters. One filter that they use is your academics, and the academic filter. I know it's such a controversial topic. They will tell you no, academics don't matter, but they do use this filter because there's just so many students who are applying for these roles that they have to apply some filter. So academics is the first one that they do, right? And they're going to look at your GPA, and they're going to, if there's any like other things related to that, like, okay, anything academic related, but mainly GPA. And they're going to be like, okay, so this student, oh, nice, it's a DHL student or whatever, right? So they're going to look at that. So that's the first filter. They're essentially going to rule out people with very low GPAs, unfortunately. And then the second thing they're going to do is, so the second cut they're going to make is related to, and so there's a scoring system. So not just like completely ruled out, but there's a scoring system. So they're going to score you. You're going to be like, okay, this, most of these students are above this, like they're the 10-20% of the class. Let's give them a score of A or 1 or 2 or whatever. And then the rest are out of the pool. But let's look at the second metric. You're not, some of them are completely ruled out, some are like maybes, and then some are like, yes, good GPA. And so the second filter that they're going to use is your work experiences. So yeah, I know you mentioned internship, but it's not just any internship. They're going to look at like what kind of companies did you work for. So it does help to, let's say, work in like good renowned companies if you're, let's say, applying for a global firm, because I just know the names. So I'm not trying to just say that it can just be like, let's say, Unilever, but it can also be a company like Bazaar, and then you can always mention like, oh, hey, the startup raised X amount of funding, but whatever, like a company that did something interesting really helps. So either the company did something really interesting helps, or the company is a renowned company. People know about the company from around the world. So those two things matter. What kind of work you did there matters as well. So was it just something really like something not very impactful? Or was it something really interesting? You were literally working with the CEO of the company, trying to raise funding and doing pitches. Like, that's interesting, you know? So I'm just giving an example. So that's the second thing they're going to look at. The third thing they're going to evaluate is your extracurriculars. And so extracurriculars would be things like, okay, did the person get a leadership position at, how committed were they to their society, and did they end up with a leadership position at the end? So obviously it looks really good if you were, like, say, vice president of your society, or did you start a new society? I don't know, but they're trying to look for like that initiative. So they're going to look at your extracurriculars, like 1 or 2 would be good enough. And I think that there is like one other filter where they're then just going to go ahead and look at your overall profile and see if you did any extra additional interesting projects. And that's really how your CV goes through. And then the cover letter, the main question that they're really going to look at is, why our company, for example. They really look for that answer in the cover letter. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it answers the questions pretty well. So I just want to ask, like in this year, only one candidate got into Bain, right? Like, so
Yeah.
I think at least 50 students would have DHL that would be have been applied to Bain. But what really differentiated that person? Does it mean that, like, when I talk to the recruiters, they say we have enough opportunities. We just see who crosses the bar, right? And we do not have an X number of positions, but anyone who crosses the bar can be hired by us. But I just saw that in this year only one person got into Bain. So I was in a confusion that what does really matter. Does it because that they do not have enough opportunities, or is it because that only one person crossed that bar?
No, it's not that. It's like there will be a lot of people who will be able to cross that bar. And to be honest, like you have to accept the fact that there is a bit of luck involved as well, because sometimes the other company, you're neck to neck with another person, but you're being left behind because they just don't have enough seats or space. Um, I know that they hired a lot in like the previous years, and they were trying to like post pandemic, and they were trying to correct for that. And so the hiring has slowed down a bit since then. It should be fine this year, but I know that up until last year, hiring slowed down a bit, and they just did not want to take on more candidates, right? So sometimes it can be a bit of that as well, and it's okay to kind of accept that. And the way to deal with those kind of situation is to try and try and basically throw your net as wide as possible and apply to as many places as possible. Is what I can say. Okay, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. All right. So Zainab?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I'm actually recently I've graduated and I've just started like applying to jobs and everything.
Mhm.
And so right now what I'm kind of dealing with, and maybe you can like help me figure it out, then think through this, is like, um, do you kind of like apply to all the jobs that say, oh, okay, we are hiring fresh graduates, or do you like at this stage of your career like decide, okay, I want to go into marketing or I want to focus on a sales role? Because yeah, because it's kind of really confusing. Okay, do I pick an industry and stick with it? Do I pick a role and stick with it? Like, how should I reason through like this dilemma, I guess?
So if you're confused about what I want to do, if that is your question, yes, it would help you to engage in like a robust self-reflection exercise where you sit down with a pen and paper and you answer a bunch of questions, including where does what kind of things excite me? What is my passion? What kind of pieces of work that I did that I've been doing so far that I'm good at. So what am I passionate about? What am I good at? What do I enjoy doing? Like not passionate, but I enjoy doing these. And make a list of those kinds of work, like pieces of work, and try to identify and self-reflect on who you really are. So it would help you like at least get a head start. But I would say beyond that exercise, no, you're not really expected to know exactly what career you need to be in today. As you've heard from my experiences, I've switched like 5 times, and that's completely fine. I also want you to know I was not a management science major when I joined LUMS. I came in with a law major as a law major in my first year, and then pivoted, and I finished my degree in 3 years, and that's fine. Doesn't matter, right? Um, so that those kinds of things happen. You do make switches, and a lot of employers today are expecting you to switch either within the same company or switch companies, one company to another, and that's completely okay to do. You just need to remember to be an overall like passionate student who likes to do things, and then apply to, like, let's say your short list. Make a short list of things that excite you, and just go with that. I would say that at this stage of your career, because I know that you're a bit early, it does help to try and apply to some of the good companies, just because there's broader scopes there and there's more opportunities for you to experiment with different things, if that makes sense. For example, I know that, let's say P&G or some of these other companies will have more options for you to try an experiment. If you're really confused, consulting gives you more options to experiment. But other than that, there's no reason why, let's say you if you want to work for a smaller company, go ahead. you want to work for a startup, go ahead. You choose what you want to do in life. That's completely fine. It just helps early on in your career if you're very confused to try and go to a bigger corporation just for a short while.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That makes sense.
All right. Let me know if anyone else has. I know that someone has put in something in the chat, so let me have a look at that. Should you explicitly list soft skills on your CV, or no, you should not? Yeah. Look, teamwork is not really a skill, right, that you need to mention on your CV. The only, like, if you want to mention some skills, it can be like, okay, the fact that I know how to, let's say, I know Tableau. Okay, that's different. But other than that, you're not at this stage of your career, you're not supposed to be mentioning these skills at all. So no, that's, I think you can save space and uh, write write other better things. You can add a bullet about something more impactful that you've done in your work. Okay. Anyone else have any other questions? Or are we then good to go? I think we're good to go, Aisha.
I think we are good to go. They don't have any questions. Thank you, Ikra, for such an insightful session. I'm sure the students would have learned a lot, and even myself have learned a lot regarding the ideal candidates. And I think this session will be quite beneficial for not only the students who have joined, but for other students as well who come to the career service office, since we'll be using the topics and the learning outcomes that you have taught us through this session. Thank you very much.
Great.
And do let
Thank you
us
so much. Yeah, go ahead, Aisha.
And do let us know if you are open to receiving questions after the session as well. If like students have some questions, should we be forwarding it to you, or you'll be available for one-on-one counseling as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, you all have my LinkedIn, and feel free to drop me a note if you want. If you want to send in more questions, I'm slow to reply, but I do reply. Like, at least give me like 2-ish days if you want to drop it. If you want to send in a few messages, just don't do something like completely last minute. So yeah, please do. I'm always excited to see LUM students grow, and generally students from Pakistan do amazing things. And so I'm really hoping that all of you go on to have amazing careers and do wonderful things, and that's always exciting, right?
Thank you. Thank you, Ikra, so much for your time and the
Okay.
valuable lessons you have given. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and then good luck with the recruiting going forward, and whatever careers you decide to take on. Feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn if you really need to. If you have more questions, if someone really needs like one-on-one counseling, then I'll just reply on LinkedIn, and we can also set up a session. I will get very busy like end of August onwards, so usually the next 2-3 weeks are usually preferable, but feel free to drop me a message anyway. And good luck with everything. All right. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Bye bye. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.